No one expected the city to freeze in terror the moment a child's scream vanished into silence. But that sound shattered everything and left a question that clawed at the heart. How can a life change in the space between one breath and the next? In the chaos that followed, the world rushed to judge, to search, to fear. Yet miles away, a single mother stood at the edge of the woods behind her small home. Realizing the nightmare she had outrun for years had somehow circled back. As the wind carried a faint whimper through the trees, she felt her pulse hammer, wondering if fate was cruel enough to drag her into a storm she had never asked to enter again. She took a hesitant step forward, unaware that the truth waiting in the shadows would tie her life to the missing girl in a way she wasn't ready to face. And the choice she made now would echo through every piece of her future. By the time she reached her porch, the world felt unreal, as if each step carried her further into a story she never agreed to play a part in. The little girl clung to her silently, trembling with the effort of holding herself together. And for a moment, the woman felt an old ache rising, the memory of another day when fear had stolen her voice, just like this child now. She whispered soft reassurances, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to calm more, the girl or herself. Storm clouds began to gather above them, turning the quiet morning heavy. And she knew the moment she made that call, nothing in her life would remain untouched. Inside the house, the girl sat on the couch, her small frame shivering as though the walls themselves carried echoes she recognized. The woman moved quietly, grabbing a blanket, warming water, anything to soften whatever the child had endured. Her own son watched from the doorway, wide-eyed and unsure, his fear mirroring hers in a way she wished he never had to experience. She tried to smile at him, steady and reassuring, but the shadows clung to her expression, reminding her that danger had never truly left their lives. When the girl finally whispered a single broken word, the room seemed to exhale, and the truth edged closer. The woman picked up her phone with shaking hands, staring at the screen as though dialing would pull open a door she could never close again. Outside, sirens wailed distantly, growing louder with each passing second, and she knew the world was already searching for the girl who now sat in her home. Her son moved closer, his small hand resting against her arm, wordless but full of questions he didn't know how to ask. She forced herself to breathe, to be steady, because whatever happened next would shape the kind of mother she was, brave, afraid, or something in between. When the police arrived, red and blue lights washed over the small house, like a warning and a promise all at once. The woman stepped outside, arms wrapped around herself as officers approached, their voices low, their expressions sharp with urgency. The girl peeked out from behind the doorway, eyes wide and searching for safety in a world that had failed her once already. The woman met the officers' questions with steady answers, but inside, her heart twisted with fear that the past she had buried so carefully was rising again, carried forward by a child she had never met until this morning. The CEO arrived in a rush of authority and fear, stepping out of a black SUV, as though the world depended on how fast he could reach his daughter. For a moment he looked less like a man of power, and more like a father who had been holding his breath for far too long. When he saw the woman standing beside the girl, something flickered across his expression, a mix of recognition and confusion he quickly tried to hide. The girl ran into his arms, burying her face into his chest, but even as he held her tight, his eyes kept drifting back to the woman, searching for answers he could not yet name. The air between them tightened, heavy with a history neither dared acknowledge. Inside the ambulance, the girl answered questions softly, while the CEO hovered nearby, torn between relief and rage at the unknown. When the woman stepped forward to offer what little she knew, the tension sharpened, as though his very presence pulled at old wounds buried deep in her memory. He thanked her with a tone that tried to sound sincere, but carried an edge, the kind that made her son shift uneasily beside her. She felt the weight of his suspicion settling on her like a shadow, and she wondered if saving the child would become the very thing that destroyed what little peace she had left. Reporters swarmed the street before the police could contain them, their voices sharp and relentless. Cameras flashed in every direction, catching every flinch, every breath, every glance. The CEO instinctively pulled his daughter closer, shielding her from the chaos, but his gaze kept sliding toward the woman as if trying to place her in a memory that refused to come clean. She felt her chest tighten under the scrutiny, not from the media, but from the man whose life once brushed dangerously close to hers. Her son stepped in front of her, small but determined, and for a heartbeat she forgot the world, watching, seeing only the fear she had passed on to him. At the station, the questions became sharper, more precise, each one slicing closer to the truth she had spent years guarding. The CEO stood behind the glass window watching her speak to detectives, his daughter resting against him as exhaustion pulled her eyelids heavy. He studied the woman as if searching for the missing pieces of a puzzle he didn't know he was solving. She answered calmly, her voice steady, but underneath she felt the tremble of old memories clawing their way to the surface. She hoped no one noticed the way her hands tightened around her son's shoulders. When they were finally allowed to leave, the CEO approached her outside the station, his daughter asleep against his shoulder. He thanked her again, but this time there was no politeness, only a searching intensity that made her breath catch. Something inside him recognized something inside her, and she could feel it, like a warning tapping at the edges of her chest. Her son tugged her sleeve, urging her to go, and she knew staying any longer would risk unraveling the life she fought so hard to rebuild. But before she could turn away, the CEO asked a quiet question that made her freeze, one only someone who remembered her from a different time would dare to ask. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Not for the woman and not for the boy who kept waking at every creak of the floorboards. She sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, staring at the same cold cup of tea, while memories she had buried years ago rose like ghosts. She had once walked the halls of the CEO's company, quiet but determined, unaware that a single moment would change the course of her life forever. Now the fear she thought she had outrun returned with the same sharp edge, reminding her that secrets never stayed hidden as long as you hope. Her son wandered into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, and when he climbed onto her lap, she held him tightly, wishing she could shield him from the storm creeping back into their lives. Across the city, the CEO sat awake in his office, unable to escape the nagging feeling that the woman who saved his daughter was more than a stranger. He sifted through old employee records, each file pulling him further into a past he had ignored for too long. When he found her name, a faint memory cracked open, one he had buried under years of ambition and regret. His daughter stirred in the chair beside him, her small hand reaching toward him in her sleep, and the sight forced a painful truth into focus. He had missed the signs then, just as he had missed them now. The weight of it pressed hard against his chest. Pressed hard against his chest. Morning arrived with a chill that crept beneath the doors, and the woman forced herself to move through her routine, even as dread curled in her stomach. She walked her son to school, pretending not to notice the way he held her hand tighter than usual. Every sound felt louder, every shadow heavier, as if the world itself was warning her that something was shifting. When she returned home, a police car was parked outside and her breath caught. The officer didn't accuse her of anything, but the questions, gentle as they were, cut deeper than she expected. She answered carefully, knowing one wrong word might unravel everything she'd fought to protect. At headquarters, the CEO met with his inner circle, each executive offering clipped explanations and polished reassurances, but he sensed cracks beneath their calm. One senior executive in particular avoided his eyes, shifting uncomfortably whenever the kidnapping was mentioned. The CEO watched him closely, piecing together fragments of suspicion with every passing moment. His instincts screamed that the danger wasn't outside their walls. It was rooted deep within the company he had built. And as his daughter quietly played with a stuffed toy at the corner of the room, he felt a surge of protectiveness rising like a tide. Back at home, the woman found herself standing in front of an old, dust-covered box she had promised never to open again. Her hands shook as she lifted the lid, revealing papers and photos from the years she worked for the CEO. Proof of the truth she had tried to bury. Her son peeked into the room, sensing the heaviness in the air, and she quickly tucked the box away, offering him a soft smile that didn't reach her eyes. She felt the walls closing in, the past pushing closer, and she knew that sooner or later she would have to choose between silence and survival. And neither choice came without pain. The woman walked through the grocery store aisles pretending everything was normal, but every sound felt sharper. Every glance felt heavier. The weight of the box she had opened lingered in her chest like an unanswered question, tightening with each step. She kept replaying the girl's trembling voice in her mind, the fragments of fear hidden between her pauses. Her son pushed the cart beside her, trying to act grown, but she saw the worry in his eyes. She wanted to shield him from all of it. The truth, the danger, the past that refused to stay quiet. But the walls were closing in fast, and she sensed the moment she had feared for years was finally reaching her doorstep. Across town, the CEO met privately with security analysts who confirmed the possibility he had feared most. Someone inside his own company had orchestrated the abduction attempt. Rage simmered beneath his composed exterior, but beneath that rage was something deeper, guilt, sharp, and cold. As he studied the evidence, a single name resurfaced again and again, linking back to unfinished business from years before. His daughter clung to his arm as they walked out of the building, her small fingers anchoring him as the world he built began to fracture under the weight of a truth he wished he had seen sooner. Later that afternoon, the woman sat in her living room, staring at the box she had hidden once more, though its contents still screamed inside her mind. She remembered the day everything changed, how she had overheard something no one was meant to hear, and how she paid the price silently. Her son played quietly nearby, trying to pretend nothing was wrong, but every now and then he glanced up, studying her face like he feared she might disappear. She wished she could tell him the truth, but the truth had teeth, and once spoken it could tear their lives apart for good. At the CEO's headquarters, tension broke into outright suspicion during a board meeting. The senior executive who had been avoiding his gaze finally slipped, offering a detail only someone involved would have known. The CEO's chest tightened as realization struck like a blow. Betrayal had been hiding in plain sight, wrapped in handshakes and polished loyalty. His daughter sat quietly in his office afterward, drawing pictures on a notepad, unaware of the storm forming outside the door. He watched her small hands move and vowed that no matter the cost, he would protect her, the way he had failed to protect so much before. That evening, the woman stepped outside to breathe in the cool air, hoping it might steady the fear twisting inside her. But as she reached the edge of her yard, she froze. The CEO stood near her gate, his expression carved from worry and determination. For a moment they only stared at each other, the past stretching between them like a bridge she wished she could burn. He stepped forward slowly, not with accusation but with a heaviness that told her he finally understood the truth was no longer buried. She felt her son watching from the doorway, and as she met the CEO's eyes, she knew everything was about to change. The woman stood frozen as the CEO stepped into her yard, each footfall heavy with the weight of everything they had both avoided for years. She wished she could run, wished she could take her son and disappear into the dark, but the past had finally caught up, and there was no escaping it now. He looked at her not with anger, but with the painful recognition of someone realizing he had failed the very people he should have protected. Her son hovered behind her, sensing the tension in the air, his small hand gripping her shirt. The CEO spoke her name softly, and the sound of it nearly broke her. It was a reminder of a world she had been forced to leave, and a truth she had never wanted to revisit. But tonight, she knew she had no choice. Inside the house, the silence thickened as the woman sat at the edge of the couch, while the CEO stood across from her, too restless to sit. He asked her to tell him the truth, and though her voice trembled, she began unraveling the story she had locked inside for years. She told him about the day she had overheard a conversation between executives, plans that risked the safety of people he cared about. She told him how reporting it had cost her everything. As she spoke, his face shifted from disbelief to regret, each detail carving deeper into him. Her son sat close beside her, watching her with a mixture of pride and fear as she finally broke her silence. The CEO's voice cracked as he questioned the parts of the past he had never understood, why she left without explanation, why she never came to him with what she knew. She felt her breath hitch as she explained the truth. She had tried, but the man now at the center of the current conspiracy had silenced her before she could reach him. He had made sure her name was smeared, her career destroyed, and her safety threatened. The CEO stepped back as the realization crashed over him, guilt slicing deeper than any accusation could. For the first time, he saw her not as someone who disappeared, but as someone he had failed to protect. The conversation shifted from revelation to confrontation as the CEO admitted that the same executive still held power within the company. Power the kidnapping attempt now exposed as poison. He confessed that he had suspected something but never followed the trail deeply enough, too consumed by ambition to see the rot behind him. The woman closed her eyes against the familiar sting of betrayal, realizing the danger was not just resurfacing, it had never left. Her son leaned into her side, grounding her as she struggled to steady the shaking in her hands. When the CEO vowed to make things right, she believed him, but she also knew the cost would be steep. Before the CEO left, he paused at the doorway and looked at the woman with a resolve she had never seen in him before. He promised to confront the executive, to expose the truth, and to protect both families from the danger now circling closer. But as he stepped into the night, she felt a chill run through her, sensing that the confrontation would not end quietly. Her son wrapped his arms around her waist, grounding her as dread twisted in her stomach. She knew the truth was in motion now, unstoppable, and whatever happened next would change all of their lives forever. The next morning arrived heavy with an uneasy stillness, the kind that made every sound feel sharper and every breath feel cautious. The woman tried to move through her routine, but her hands trembled as she packed her son's lunch, knowing the danger they'd been outrunning was now standing at their doorstep. Her son sensed it too, watching her with quiet fear as he slipped on his backpack. She pulled him into her arms, holding him longer than usual, wishing she could freeze time before the world outside pulled her into another storm. The truth she had shared with the CEO was no longer a secret, and she knew the people who wanted it buried would not stay silent for long. Her heart ached with the weight of a choice she still had to make. At headquarters, the CEO gathered evidence, preparing for a confrontation he knew would change everything. His daughter sat beside him, drawing quietly, unaware of how close danger had come to their lives. He looked at her small hands moving over the paper and felt fear pulse through him, fear that he had waited too long to act, fear that he might fail again. The senior executive walked past his office door, pausing just a moment too long, and the CEO saw it. The subtle smirk, the quiet confidence of a man who believed he still held all the power. But this time the CEO wasn't blinded by loyalty. This time, he saw clearly. Back at home, the woman jumped when a soft knock echoed across the front door. When she opened it, a detective stood on the porch, speaking in calm but urgent tones. They had received new information. Someone had been seen near her home last night, someone connected to the same executive the CEO suspected. Her stomach tightened as fear rippled through her. She glanced back at her son, who watched from the hallway with wide, frightened eyes. The detective assured her they would keep watch, but she knew better than to trust promises that came too late. She thanked him quietly and closed the door, her heart pounding as the reality settled in. The danger was moving closer. At the company, the CEO finally confronted the senior executive in a tense, closed-door meeting. The air crackled with accusation as the executive denied everything, his voice too smooth, too rehearsed. The CEO watched him closely, seeing through every lie, feeling anger coil in his chest. When he presented the evidence, emails, security footage, financial trails, the mask cracked. The executive's expression shifted into something darker, something dangerous. and for a moment the CEO saw the man behind the polished suit. He realized then that exposing him wouldn't be enough. The man wouldn't go down quietly, and he wouldn't go down alone. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the woman sensed the change in the air. A quiet unease settling around her home like a warning. Her son sat close beside her on the couch, clutching a blanket, eyes darting to every small sound. She wrapped her arm around him, trying to steady both of their breathing. She knew the CEO was fighting his own battle across the city, but she also knew that the fallout of that battle could fall on her doorstep at any moment. And then, just as the house settled into silence, she heard it. The faint rustling outside the window, the unmistakable sign that someone was there. Her heart clenched as she held her son closer, realizing the moment she had feared had finally arrived. The woman held her breath as the shadow outside the window shifted, each second stretching painfully until the distant sound of a car engine roared up the street. The figure slipped away into the dark, just as headlights swept across her yard, and relief washed through her so fast it nearly brought her to her knees. The CEO stepped out of his car, urgency written into every movement, and she opened the door before he reached it. Her son clung to her side, trembling, and she felt the weight of the danger closing in on all of them. The CEO looked at her with a mixture of fear and determination, and she realized he had come not just to warn her, but to fight beside her. Tonight, the final truth would break open, and it would demand everything they had left. Inside, the CEO explained everything. The confrontation, the lies, the proof that the executive had orchestrated not only the abduction but the silencing of anyone who threatened his power, including her years ago. Her breath caught as pieces of the past snapped together with terrifying clarity. No, she looked at her son, who watched both adults with wide, confused eyes, and she wished she could spare him from the darkness creeping into their lives. But tonight, there was no more hiding. As the CEO paced, fighting to stay composed, she realized he wasn't just here to deliver the truth. He was here because he finally understood how deeply it had all scarred her. His daughter had nearly been lost. She had nearly lost everything, too. They were bound now by wounds neither had ever dared to speak aloud. A sudden crash outside sent all three of them stiffening in place. The woman's heart slammed against her ribs as the CEO motioned for her to stay back, but she refused to let fear swallow her again. She stepped forward with him, her son gripping her shirt tightly. Through the front window, she saw the senior executive emerge from the shadows, his expression twisted with desperation and anger. The past she had outrun for so long now stood on her doorstep, fully unmasked. She felt her son press into her side, and in that moment something inside her shifted. Fear giving way to a quiet, fierce resolve she hadn't known she still held. She would not run anymore. The CEO pushed open the door, confronting the man who had betrayed his trust and threatened the people he cared about most. The executive's voice shook with venom as he hurled accusations, insisting he had done what was necessary, that the CEO had been too blind to see how vulnerable his empire had become. The woman stood behind the CEO, her son clinging to her waist, and she listened as the past finally cracked open. Her silencing, her disappearance, the years she spent rebuilding the life he had nearly destroyed. When the executive stepped toward her, rage burning in his eyes, the CEO moved instantly, blocking the path with a force that made the man falter. For the first time, she saw the CEO not as a distant figure of power, but as someone who truly understood what it meant to protect something fragile. The police arrived moments later, lights flashing as officers pulled the executive away, while he shouted threats that scattered into the night. The woman stood trembling in the doorway, her son wrapped in her arms, watching the final piece of her past finally being dragged away. The CEO approached slowly, his daughter asleep in the back seat of his car, unaware of the storm that had nearly consumed them all. For a long moment, neither he nor the woman spoke. They simply stood in the quiet hum of settling chaos, understanding that what connected them now was more than fear. It was survival, sacrifice, and the unspoken truth that both had protected each other's children when it mattered most. As dawn began to break, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Relief, soft and fragile, rising like morning light.